Welcome to this week's podcast. It's not all black and white. My name is Cera. I'm black.
I'm Matthew. I'm white. This is the Interracial Couple Podcast, and welcome. So today we were talking about making friends as an interracial couple, which I don't think is necessarily, at least in my experience, it's not necessarily something that is vastly different. I mean, we're people, but there are conditions that make things slightly different. So as we were talking about what was going on today and being here in Kenya, and what we noticed in the couples that we've met and the friends that we've been making since we've been here is a pattern. So as we started thinking about that pattern, we kind of went back to some of the beginnings for us, our childhoods, and the racial mix or the lack thereof for both of us in each in our situation.
So let's kind of go back and start talking about like childhood. Why your friends diverse?
Were my friends diverse?
Yeah.
No, they were not. I did not have a particularly diverse group of friends growing up.
Neither did I. I grew up in a village in Kenya and all my friends were black.
And I grew up in a couple cities in America and also rural America. And my friends were certainly predominantly white. That's not to say, as I started to think about it, I was thinking, like even in my class, I don't even remember specifically. I think it was, pretty much across the board. What in high school, a friend of mine is Asian American, but still not terribly racially diverse. But then kind of even going through, you were talking also about when that started to, like the beginning of that shift for you.
I would say like my first diverse group of friends was like when I was 19. I had a volunteer job and there was this guy who was from Estonia and he became like my first white friend. So I was 19 and then I got a job at a hotel that was in the city and there was like a lot of other people coming, Asians, people from other countries. At that moment, I also remember like I had a Rwandese friend and Congolese friends, but pretty much before that, all my friends were Kenyans.
Yeah.
And not also Kenyans, like all my friends were Kenyans and also from like my village or from like the neighborhood that I grew up in Isili, in Nairobi, so it was like either from the village or from like Isili.
Yeah.
So that was like my first white friend was 19.
19.
Yeah.
Even in college, it was, I didn't go to a very diverse college either. So, and then even when I moved to LA, I saw that, when I got to sort of that age with the kids in school and then work. So between career was the people who I was working with, and then parents of the students that my kids went to school with, which was also not, seemed to just not be very racially diverse. And I think one of the things that came up for me that when I hit it, and we might have talked about this briefly beforehand, but when I think I got to this point where I could start kind of considering it, or I was, the kids were growing up. I was divorced, and I was on Tinder, and it didn't occur to me early on, but at a certain point I realized Tinder's only feeding me Caucasian profiles. And at a certain point I was like, this is just weird.
Yeah.
It was just strange that I could go through on a day and not see anyone of color. That was odd, But
was it because of the neighborhood? Probably the neighborhood and the women that you were swiping before that?
It could have been, but I don't know. And eventually it's kind of like I even made sort of an effort to say, I want to see if I can like change this, whatever this algorithm is. But that just became this weird thing for someone like I grew up in a very Caucasian community. And as the schools that I went to, the college I went to, the people that I worked with, it was not terribly racially diverse. And some of it was just kind of where it happened to be, You didn't have a terribly racially diverse childhood either, but
No.
It makes sense. You were in Kenya and there was nobody else around. It wasn't like you were avoiding it. For you, it was 100% situational. Whereas for me, I almost feel like it wasn't situational as much as it was institutional, right? I lived in Los Angeles, a very diverse place, but yet institutionally, communities are separated by race. There's certainly a more of a Latina part of town, and more of an African American part of town, and a Armenian part of town, and white part of town. So
yeah. And so for me, that changed from like when I moved to the US and I moved in with like my family, my Jewish adopted family, where like everyone was white and the community, everyone was pretty much white. I did kind of seek out African friends, because I had dreadlocks back then, so I needed a black salon. And my really good friend Dana, who is Caucasian, found this salon for me. And this woman was from South Africa, and she became my first black friend. And she was like she was like, I'm gonna introduce you to my other friends. So I made a few, they were not necessarily African American, they were like African immigrants, so I met a few women. But from then, in my, after I moved to the US in my mid-20s, most of my friends became white. I would say like 90%.
Really, that high?
Yeah. I would say like 90%, maybe 85%. And then especially the first year where I wasn't going to school, it was just like the people that I was living with, in the community that I was in. So everyone was white. And then I started going to community college, and things shifted because it was like more black people go to attend community college. So I started making more African American friends. And I really wanted to I always think African Americans are like the coolest blacks. So I just really was looking to have an African American friend.
So that was you mean, is that like a cultural thing from where you growing up here? Or where did that come from?
I think so. I always thought with all the African American struggle and everything that they have accomplished is I think they're kick ass. So I really wanted some, I wanted to know also about the culture. Once you come to America, everyone sees you as, as black, but I am black, but I am so African. I grew up in a village, so culturally we tend to be very different. And I really wanted to learn about their culture.
Because it's kind of now, even if it hasn't been your culture, many people, if you're just moving around the U.S., it will be assumed that that's your culture.
Correct.
By the way you look.
Yeah, and I don't mind when people assume it, but if I don't know
you have to at least know about it.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
So I feel I was seeking more African American friends and not only seeking, but I was in a place where they were, after my second year, community college had more African American friends. Yeah. So yeah, I feel after that but still predominantly my friends remained white.
Yeah.